Hello, good morning, dear students. Today we are starting with the first chapter, second part, A Triumph of Surgery. Fine. So let us just start with the chapter. Poor old lad, I said. You haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. So over here, Mr. Heriot is saying to Mrs. Pumphrey that look at this poor old lady. I know that she is not having enough capability or she is not having enough strength in herself that she would make her heart so hard to make Tricky normal like before he used to be. But Mr. Heriot is saying that he already knew that how to cure Tricky from this problem. At the surgery, the household dogs surged around me. Over here, surgery means a place where the doctor or a dentist or a veterinary surgeon treats his patient, and surged means moved suddenly and powerfully forward or upward. So, Mr. Heriot is saying that when he just reached at his veterinary surgery hospital, along with the tricky, his household dogs surged around him. Means the number of dogs that were already there in his hospital for their treatment, they were just moving around Mr. Heriot. Ricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes and when put down, lay motionlessly on the carpet. So he is saying that Ricky was just looking down at the noisy pack. Pack means a group of dogs over here. So Mr. Heriot is saying that Ricky was just looking at this number of dogs who were roaming around me at the hospital, and when Mr. Heriot kept Ricky down to stand, he just laid down without any movement on the carpet. The other dogs, are sniffing around him for a few seconds, decided he was an interesting object and ignored him. So, when Mr. Heriot just kept down the tricky was just laid down on the carpet, and when he just laid down on the carpet, other dogs were also roaming around him, and they just roamed around him and they just looked around Tricky for the few seconds. But at last, they decided that Tricky was totally and observed that he is totally an uninteresting object. Means he is not showing any kind of interest to the other dogs, so they just ignored him and went away. I made up a bed for him in the warm loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. So, Mr. Heriot is saying that he had just made up a bed for the tricky with a warm loose box which was there with him. And where did he kept his bed? He just kept the bed of the tricky near the space where the other dogs used to sleep. And for the next 2 days, Mr. Heriot did not give anything to the tricky to eat. He just gave plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third day, he began to whimper where he heard the dogs in the yard. So, for these 2 days, he did not show any kind of response to anyone. He did behave like as if he is not feeling good. But at the end of the second day, he just started showing some interest to the Mr. Heriot, and he just started showing some interest to the other dogs as well, and he began to whimper, means to make a series of low, feeble sound expressive of fear, pain, or unhappiness. So he was just little unhappy with the situation that was already there at Mr. Heriot's place. So at the end of the second day, he just showed some interest, and he also heard the noise of the other dogs that were roaming around them. When I opened the door, Ricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Job, the greyhound, and his friend. So when Mr. Heriot opened the door, he just trotted. Trotted means to run out with a moderate pace and with short steps. So he just ran out and he was immediately engulfed. Engulfed means surrounded or completely covered by. So he was just covered by the greyhound. Greyhound is the name of a breed of the dog, and Joe is the name of that greyhound. So when Mr. Heriot opened the door, Ricky just came out of the box, and he was just surrounded by the other dogs and his friends, because he had already spent 2 days with the other dogs in the veterinary hospital. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Ricky followed them, rolling slightly with the surplus pride. So, after rolling him with the other dogs, so he just ran outside with the other dogs, and when the other dogs were rolling around him and inspecting him, the other dogs just moved towards the garden, and the Ricky was also moving towards the garden. He just followed the other dogs, rolling slightly, as he did not eat for the last 2 days. He was not having enough fat, but he was having a little fat in his body. Later that day, I was present at the feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowl. So, on the next day, Mr. Hedot is saying that he was just present at the time when the dogs were feeding, means when the dogs were given the food, and he was just watching that when Tristan means the servant of the employees, poured. Slopped means he spread over the edge of the container, means when he just gave the food to the dogs, the food went into the bowl. There was the unusual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of the high speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. So, as the usual headlong was going on, means the usual rush was going on, that everybody was following, and they were just having the sound of eating with high speed, and every dog already knew that if they would not eat with great speed, they were supposed to give some part of their meal to the other dogs, because if other dogs will complete their meal first, they will just come to eat from their bowl as well, as it was a competition type of atmosphere over there. When they had finished, Ricky took a walk around the shining bowls, looking casually inside one or two of them. But when they already finished their food, but Ricky was still feeling hungry, so he was just licking the other bowls for one or two. Next day, an extra bowl was put for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. So, as Ricky was feeling hungry, so Mr. Hedot said that the next day you just give two bowls to Ricky. So when he was given the two bowls, he was just jostling, means he was just pushing his elbow and bump against someone, and he was just eating that food. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medical treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining their friendly activities. So, and from them that day, they were not having any kind of medical treatment for the Ricky, but he was just enjoying the atmosphere over there, and the progress over there was also rapid, and he was just joining the other dogs as well. He discovered the joys of being pulled over, tramped on and squashed every few minutes. So he just observed that he was just being bowled over, and he just was moving from here to there for few minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang, and an unlikely, silky little object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at meal times and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never such a time in his life. So Mr. Heliot is saying that now Ricky has become the accepted member of the surgery, and like other dogs, he had just joined the little gang, and he was also having the habit that he was fighting like a tiger for his share to eat his portion at during the meal time, and he also had the habit of hunting the rats at the hen house at night. And he is saying that I just observed that Ricky could not have such type of a part in his life ever again. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletin. So, and all the time, Mrs. Pumphrey used to hover anxiously, means she used to disturb, or she used to just call Mr. Hedot every now and then, and asking the latest news about the tricky bulletins, means news. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather, but I was able to tell her that little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. So, Mr. Hedot is saying that he just avoided the questions. What type of questions Mrs. Pumphrey used to ask, that whether she whether the cushions of Tricky has been changed every day or not, and whether he has just worn the correct coat according to the weather or not. But he was able to tell that the little fellow was out of danger, and he was convalescing means he was recovering easily from illness, and he was recovering very fast. The word convalescing seemed to do something that Mrs. Pumphrey. She started bringing round fresh eggs, 2 dozens at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. But when Mr. Heriot told Mrs. Pumphrey that the growth of Tricky is very fast and he is just out of danger, she started sending the 2 dozens of eggs at a time to build the strength of Tricky. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast. When the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. So, initially, Mrs. Pumphrey used to send 2 dozens of eggs only, but as the time spent, the happy period began that his partners and Mr. Hero started consuming that eggs, because as that eggs were danger for the Tricky, so he was not supposed to give that eggs to Tricky. And the real happiness came when the bottles of wine also arrived at the hospital. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became the ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. So it was type and ceremonial occasion because Mrs. Pumphrey was sending all these things for the benefit of Tricky. But instead of giving that food to Tricky, that were consumed by Mr. Heriot. Why? Because by eating all these things only, the health of the Tricky was not good. So it was a ceremonial occasion for Mr. Heriot and the employees who were working at his surgery, and they used to consume the 2 glasses of wine before the meal, and several times they used to consume that at the time of the meal as well. We would hardly believe it when the brandy came up to a final edge to his constitution. For the few nights, fine spirit was rolled around and held and reverently drunk. So now the situation was under control, and it was the best time that when brandy also came to a final edge means to sharpen this or to hold, and reverently means respectfully. And for the few nights, they just consumed that brandy as well. These were the days of deep contentment. That were the days that when they used to consume the eggs, wine, and brandy, and that were the days of deep satisfaction. Straight well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously around with a fire with a brandy. So what they used to do, they used to consume the eggs which were sent by Mrs. Pumphrey in the morning. They used to consume the wine in the afternoon, and at the night with the fire they used to consume the brandy as well. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was in awaiting collection. So initially they just felt that they should keep Tricky as a permanent guest over here, but they already knew that Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, that she was not at all well without Tricky. And it was already the period of 15 days that they left Tricky and Mrs. Pumphrey away from each other. And the dog was also an awaiting collection, means the dog was also waiting idly for Mrs. Pumphrey. Within a minute, without 30 feet of leaning back, Patel drew up outside the surgery. And when Mr. Heriot informed to Mrs. Pumphrey that Tricky was out of danger and she can take Tricky home, within a 30 minutes, or within a few minutes, 30 feet means a long car was just standing outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior. The chauffeur means the driver. The driver just opened the door, and he could just make out that he could just see the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey, and she was almost lost in his interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Heriot, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" So Mrs. Pumphrey is saying that she is just asking to the Mr. Heriot that is Tricky out of danger and is he really feeling better now? "Yes, he is fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him." So Mr. Heriot is saying to Mrs. Pumphrey that yeah, he is almost fine, and there is no need for you to come out of the car. I will just go and take Tricky. I walked through the house into the garden. So he just took the Tricky and he walked into the garden. A mass of dogs were hurtling around, round and round alone, in their midst was flapping the tail, waving the little golden figure of Tricky. And when Mr. Heriot just came out to take the Tricky, the little boys were also roaming around the Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a flexible, hard-muscled animal who was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out his great palms, his chest almost brushing the ground. So, within the period of 2 weeks, that he has transformed into a flexible animal and was keeping well with his pack as well. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house, and he just carried back to him into the house of Mrs. Pumphrey. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open. And when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in tremendous leap and sailed into the Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. And when the chauffeur was just standing opening the door, and when Mr. Heriot came out with the Tricky on his hand, and when Tricky saw Mrs. Pumphrey, he just ran from the hands of Mr. Heriot and just tremendously just leaped into the arms of Mrs. Pumphrey. She gave a startled "oh" and then she had to defend herself as she swarmed over, licking her face and barking. So Tricky was so excited to see Mrs. Pumphrey after a long time. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring his beds, toys, cushions, coats, bowls, none of which has been used. So when Mr. Heriot said to Mrs. Pumphrey that he was fine, and when she came to take the Tricky and Mrs. Pumphrey were busy with they were just spending the time with each other, and during that excitement moment, Mr. Heriot had the driver of Mrs. Pumphrey to bring the beds, toys and cushions of Tricky, which were not at all used. The car moved away, and Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes, her lips trembled. And further the car moved, and Mrs. Pumphrey was just leaning out of the window, and she was just seeing that how Tricky was when she used to give her plenty of food, and now the Tricky has already been transformed. "Oh, Mr. Heriot," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." So she is saying that I am not having any words to say thanks to Mr. Heriot, as this is a triumph of surgery. Triumph means a victory, that they had already achieved the victory from the surgery. Thank you.